I'm standing in my lawyer's office, holding the keys to 37 properties, watching my mother's face crumble as she realizes what I've just done. "Sarah, you can't be serious," she whispers, her voice barely audible over the sound of my father clearing his throat nervously. "But I am serious. Dead serious. After 28 years of being told I'm worthless, that I'll never amount to anything, that I should be grateful for whatever scraps of affection they throw my way, I've finally found my voice. The same voice they spent decades trying to silence is now the one delivering their eviction notices. My hands aren't shaking anymore like they used to when I was a scared little girl begging for their approval. Now they're steady, confident, holding the power I never knew I had. The morning started like any other family gathering at Mom's house on Maple Street, the same street where I grew up watching my parents shower my golden boy brother Michael with praise while I scrubbed their floors for my allowance. Thanksgiving was always their favorite holiday to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy, and this year was no different. I walked into that familiar living room with its outdated floral wallpaper and the smell of turkey that should have been comforting, but always made my stomach turn with anxiety. My sister Jessica was already there with her husband Brad, both of them lounging on the good couch while I was expected to sit on the uncomfortable wooden chair by the window. It's funny how even at 28, I still automatically gravitated toward that chair like a well-trained dog. "Sarah's here," Mom announced to the room, not looking up from her magazine. "Did you remember to bring the dinner rolls like I asked?" I nodded, holding up the bag from the expensive bakery she'd specifically requested, knowing full well she'd find something wrong with them. "I hope you didn't get the ones with sesame seeds," she continued, finally glancing at me with that disapproving look I knew so well. "You know your father can't have seeds." Of course I knew. I'd been catering to Dad's dietary restrictions for years, memorizing every food he couldn't eat, every preference he had, every way I could possibly disappoint him. The rolls were plain, exactly as requested, but I could already see her gearing up for the next criticism. Michael walked in 20 minutes later with no contribution to dinner and was greeted like a returning war hero. "There's my successful son," Dad boomed, jumping up to embrace him while I sat forgotten in my corner chair. "How's the real estate business treating you?" Michael launched into his usual bragging session about his latest deals, how he'd just closed on another commercial property, how clients were practically throwing money at him. I'd heard the song and dance 100 times before, but what came next still caught me off guard. "Unlike some people in this family," he said, glancing meaningfully at me, "I actually know how to handle money and investments. Sarah, you're still renting that little apartment, right? Mom told me you're too scared to even apply for a mortgage." The conversation that followed was the final straw that broke my spirit completely. Dad leaned back in his recliner, the one that had been his throne for as long as I could remember, and launched into his favorite speech about financial responsibility. "Sarah, sweetheart, some people are just cut out for property ownership and some aren't. There's no shame in being a renter your whole life. Not everyone can handle the responsibility of a mortgage, property taxes, maintenance costs." His voice was gentle, almost paternal, which somehow made it worse than if he'd just yelled at me. "You've always been more of a follower than a leader. Even as a little girl, you needed constant guidance. Remember when you wanted to start that little art business? We had to talk you out of it because you just didn't have the business sense." Jessica chimed in with her trademark fake sweetness, the same tone she'd used to torture me throughout our childhood. "Dad's right, Sarah. I mean, look at me and Brad. We bought our first house when I was 23, and now we're on our third upgrade. It takes a certain kind of confidence and financial savvy. Maybe you should focus on what you're good at instead of trying to be something you're not." She gestured vaguely at my clothes, my hair, my entire existence. "There's nothing wrong with being ordinary. Not everyone can be extraordinary like Michael. The word ordinary hung in the air like a slap, and I felt that familiar burn of shame creeping up my neck. But this time, something else was burning too. Something that felt suspiciously like rage. That's when Mom delivered the killing blow, the words that would echo in my head for months afterward. "Oh, Sarah, honey, let's be realistic here. You've never owned anything more valuable than that little Honda Civic you drive. Property ownership requires planning, credit, connections, business acumen. You're 28 years old and you've never even had a serious relationship that lasted more than 6 months. How can we expect you to handle something as complex as real estate?" She laughed, actually laughed, while delivering this character assassination. "Besides, even if you could somehow scrape together a down payment, who would co-sign for someone with your limited prospects? Your father and I certainly couldn't risk our credit on such a gamble." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock that had witnessed countless family humiliations over the years. Michael and Jessica exchanged those knowing looks they'd perfected in childhood, the same looks that said, "Poor Sarah, she'll never get it." But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been planning something for months. Something that would change everything. What my family didn't know as they sat there dismantling my self-worth piece by piece was that I'd been living a double life for the past 3 years. While they saw me as their perpetual disappointment, struggling to make ends meet in my tiny apartment, I had actually been building something extraordinary. It started with a coding bootcamp I'd enrolled in secretly, using vacation days from my administrative job to attend classes. I told them I was taking pottery lessons because I knew they'd mock any attempt at real self-improvement. Those pottery lessons turned into late nights learning Python, JavaScript, and database management, skills that landed me a remote position with a tech startup in Silicon Valley. The salary was more than my entire family made combined, but I kept living like I was still broke. The deception had been necessary for my survival, both financial and emotional. Every family gathering where they'd slip me $20 to help with groceries, while I had 6 figures sitting in investment accounts, felt like swallowing glass. When Mom would lecture me about budgeting while I was secretly funding my retirement at 25, I'd nod and thank her for her wisdom. The hardest part wasn't hiding the money, it was hiding who I'd become. I'd transformed from their scared, dependent daughter into someone who could analyze market trends, negotiate contracts, and make decisions that affected millions of dollars. But around them, I still shrank into that wooden chair, still apologized for existing, still let them treat me like I was 12 years old and incompetent. The property acquisition started 18 months ago when I noticed several houses in their neighborhood were quietly going up for sale. Maple Street had always been their pride and joy, the place where they'd raised their perfect family and established their reputation as pillars of the community. Dad loved bragging about property values, how their house had tripled in worth since they bought it in 1995. What he didn't realize was that I'd been studying the market, watching the patterns, understanding exactly why this particular area was about to become incredibly valuable. A new tech corridor was being developed 2 miles away, and I had inside information about which companies were relocating there. While my family saw me as too stupid to handle a simple mortgage, I was orchestrating a real estate empire. The first house I bought was Mrs. Henderson's place, 3 doors down from my parents. She was 86 and moving to assisted living, desperate for a quick sale to avoid the hassle of staging and showings. I offered her asking price in cash, closed in 2 weeks, and she never even knew who bought it. I used an LLC I'd created, something called Maple Holdings, with a generic business address that traced back to my lawyer's office. My name was nowhere on the paperwork that mattered to them. Mrs. Henderson was so grateful she sent me a handwritten thank you note, saying the buyer seemed like such a thoughtful young person for making the process easy for her. If only she knew that thoughtful young person was the same girl her neighbors had been calling a failure for decades. House by house, I started acquiring the entire neighborhood. The Johnsons sold when Tom got transferred to Phoenix and they needed to move fast. I bought their property for $15,000 over asking, no inspection, cash closing. The Martinez family had been struggling since Rosa lost her job, and their house was headed for foreclosure. I bought it directly from them, paid off their mortgage, and gave them enough extra to start fresh somewhere else. They cried when they signed the papers, thanking this mysterious investor for saving their credit and their dignity. What they didn't know was that their mysterious investor had grown up watching them from across the street, had babysat their kids, had been to their backyard barbecues where my own parents would make jokes about my future prospects. The beautiful irony was that my family kept talking about all these sales like they were neighborhood gossip, never connecting the dots. "Can you believe another house sold on our street?" Mom would say during our weekly phone calls. "Some investor is buying up everything. Your father thinks it's one of those big corporations, probably going to tear everything down and build condos." Dad would speculate about the buyer's identity, convinced it had to be someone with serious connections, serious money, someone nothing like his disappointing daughter. "Whoever it is has cash and moves fast," he'd say admiringly. "That's the kind of business sense I wish you could develop, Sarah. This person understands opportunity when they see it." Meanwhile, I'd be sitting in my pathetic little apartment reviewing the closing documents for my next acquisition, adding another property to my growing portfolio. By the time I walked into that Thanksgiving dinner, I owned every single house on their block except theirs. 36 properties, all purchased through various LLCs I'd created, all generating rental income that exceeded my family's combined annual salaries every single month. I'd been their landlord for over a year without them knowing it, collecting rent checks from their neighbors, making decisions about property improvements, building relationships with tenants who respected me as a businesswoman. The scared little girl they'd spent decades diminishing had become the most powerful person in their neighborhood, and they were completely oblivious. But that was about to change, because I'd saved the best property for last. Their property. The house where I'd learned I was worthless was about to become mine. The moment I decided to reveal everything came when Dad started his annual lecture about my life choices during dessert. He'd just finished his second helping of pumpkin pie, the same pie I'd watched Mom slave over for hours while she complained about how I never helped enough in the kitchen. "Sarah," he said, leaning back with that satisfied expression he always wore when he was about to deliver what he considered fatherly wisdom, "your mother and I have been talking, and we think it's time you started making some real changes. You're almost 30, still renting, still single, still working that little office job that barely pays your bills." His voice had that patronizing tone reserved for children and people he considered beneath him. "We've decided we're going to help you whether you want it or not." What came next was the most humiliating intervention I'd ever experienced, orchestrated by people who thought they knew everything about my life while knowing absolutely nothing. Mom pulled out a folder she'd apparently prepared in advance, filled with printouts of studio apartments in cheaper neighborhoods, job listings for entry-level positions, and brochures for community college courses. "We found you some better options," she announced proudly, spreading the papers across the table like she was presenting me with treasure. "There's a lovely efficiency apartment in Riverside for only $600 a month. And look, the community college has a medical billing program that only takes 18 months. You could have a real career by the time you're 31. Jessica jumped in with her contribution to my character assassination, her voice dripping with the fake concern she'd perfected over the years. "Sarah, we all love you, but love means being honest. You've been spinning your wheels for years, and it's painful to watch. Brad and I talked about it, and we think you need structure, goals, someone to hold you accountable." She glanced at her husband, who nodded seriously like they were discussing a troubled teenager instead of a grown woman. "We're willing to help you move to that cheaper apartment. Brad knows someone with a truck, and I can help you pack." Sometimes you have to hit rock bottom before you can build yourself back up. Michael decided this was his moment to shine as the successful sibling dispensing wisdom to his pathetic sister. The thing is, Sarah, you've never had to face real consequences for your choices. Mom and Dad have always been there to catch you when you fall, and that's actually been enabling your situation. He gestured vaguely at me, as if my existence was evidence of some moral failing. In real estate, we call it failure to launch. Some people need a push to realize their potential. Maybe losing the safety net will finally motivate you to become the person you're supposed to be. The condescension in his voice was thick enough to cut with a knife, and I could see Mom and Dad nodding along like he was delivering profound insights instead of recycled self-help garbage. That's when Dad delivered the final blow, the words that made my decision for me. Here's what we've decided, sweetheart. Your mother and I are going to stop giving you money. No more birthday checks, no more help with car repairs, no more emergency loans. You're going to move to that efficiency apartment, enroll in that medical billing program, and learn to stand on your own 2 feet. If you refuse, well, then you'll have to figure it out completely on your own, because we won't be enabling this behavior anymore. He said it with such certainty, such absolute conviction that he was saving me from myself. It's tough love, but it's what you need. We should have done this years ago instead of letting you drift through life without purpose or direction. The silence that followed was deafening. They all sat there looking at me expectantly, waiting for me to break down, to thank them for their intervention, to finally admit that they were right about everything. Mom had that satisfied expression she always wore when she thought she'd solved a problem. Dad looked proud of his decisive leadership, and my siblings were practically glowing with righteousness. They'd finally cornered their problem child, forced her to face reality, and now they were waiting for gratitude. Instead, I started laughing. Not the polite, nervous laughter they were used to from me, but genuine, deep laughter that came from somewhere I'd kept locked away for years. You want to cut me off? I said, wiping tears from my eyes. You think losing your $20 birthday checks is going to devastate me? That's when I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, the same app I'd been hiding from them for 3 years. Let me show you something, I said, turning the screen toward them so they could see the account balance. Mom's face went white as she read the numbers, counting zeros like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Dad's mouth fell open, and for the first time in my life, he was completely speechless. This is just my checking account, I continued, switching to my investment portfolio. This is what I've built while you've been planning my intervention. While you've been worrying about my $600 rent, I've been making more in a month than most people make in a year. The room had gone completely silent except for the sound of Jessica's sharp intake of breath and Michael's chair creaking as he leaned forward to get a better look at the screen. The revelation of my financial success was just the appetizer. What came next was the main course that would change everything forever. But wait, I said, putting my phone away and reaching into my purse for the folder I'd been carrying all day. There's more. I pulled out a thick stack of papers, property deeds, and closing documents that I'd organized chronologically, starting with Mrs. Henderson's house 18 months ago. Remember when you were all so curious about who was buying up the neighborhood? The mysterious investor with all that cash and business sense that Dad admired so much. I spread the documents across the table, right over Mom's carefully arranged intervention materials. Surprise! It was me. Your failure of a daughter owns every single house on this street except yours. The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just quiet. It was the complete absence of sound that comes when people's entire understanding of reality has just been shattered. Mom picked up the first deed with trembling hands, reading my name on the document over and over like she was trying to decode a foreign language. Dad's face had gone from white to red to a shade of purple I'd never seen before, and I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head as he tried to process what this meant. Michael grabbed one of the closing statements, scanning the purchase price with the desperate intensity of someone checking their lottery numbers. 37 properties, I continued conversationally, as if I were discussing the weather. Total value approximately $12 million, all purchased with cash, all generating rental income that exceeds your combined annual salaries every month. Jessica was the first to find her voice, and it came out as a strangled whisper. This can't be real. Sarah, where did you get this money? Did you do something illegal? Are you in some kind of trouble? Her mind was racing through possibilities, trying to find an explanation that would let her maintain her image of me as the family screw-up. Did someone die and leave you money? Did you win the lottery? There's no way you could have earned this legitimately, not with your background. The word background was loaded with all the assumptions she'd made about my capabilities, my intelligence, my worth as a human being. She literally could not conceive of a reality where I had succeeded while she thought I was failing. Dad finally exploded, his voice shaking with a combination of rage and disbelief. This is impossible. You're lying. These documents are fake. I know my own daughter, and you are not capable of this. He was standing now, pointing at me with a trembling finger, his face contorted with an emotion I'd never seen before. It wasn't just anger, it was the complete collapse of his understanding of who he was and who I was. You work in a little office. You drive a Honda. You can't even manage your own checking account without overdrafts. You're telling me you've been some kind of secret millionaire this whole time? That's insane. His voice cracked on the last word, and I realized he was genuinely terrified. Not of me, but of what my success meant about his own failures as a father and a judge of character. That's when I delivered the killing blow, the information that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The best part, I said, pulling out one final document, is that your house is going up for foreclosure next month. I know because I've been monitoring your financial situation for 2 years. Dad, those medical bills from your heart surgery that you thought insurance covered? They didn't. Mom, those credit card debts you've been hiding from Dad? I know about those too. Your mortgage is 3 months behind, and the bank has already started proceedings. I watched their faces crumble as I spoke, seeing the exact moment when they realized I knew all their secrets while they knew nothing about me. But don't worry. I've already made an offer to buy your house when it goes to auction. Cash offer, full asking price, quick closing. You'll be getting eviction notices from your own daughter. The chaos that erupted was spectacular. Mom started crying, not the gentle tears of a disappointed mother, but the ugly, desperate sobs of someone whose world was ending. Dad began shouting about lawyers and family loyalty and how children were supposed to respect their parents, but his words were hollow and everyone in the room knew it. Michael tried to salvage some dignity by demanding to know why I hadn't told them about my success, why I'd let them worry about me, why I'd deceived them for so long. Because this is exactly how you would have reacted, I told him calmly. You would have found a way to make it about yourselves, to diminish it, to explain why it wasn't real success. You would have demanded money, expected me to solve your problems, treated me like your personal ATM instead of a person who deserved your respect. Jessica made one last desperate attempt to manipulate me, falling back on the emotional blackmail that had controlled me for decades. Sarah, we're family. We love you. We were only trying to help because we care about you. You can't throw away 28 years of family bonds over some hurt feelings. Think about what you're doing. Think about Mom and Dad. Where are they supposed to go? But I was done thinking about everyone else's needs while ignoring my own. You're right, we are family, I replied, standing up from that wooden chair for the last time. And family doesn't spend decades telling someone they're worthless. Family doesn't plan interventions to fix someone who was never broken. Family doesn't laugh at dreams or mock ambitions or treat love like something that has to be earned through constant submission. 6 months later, I'm sitting in the house that used to be theirs, the house where I learned I was supposed to be small and grateful and invisible. I've redecorated completely, erasing every trace of the people who taught me to hate myself. The wooden chair is gone, replaced by a comfortable reading nook where I spend evenings reviewing my investment portfolio and planning my next acquisitions. My parents moved to a 2-bedroom apartment across town, still refusing to speak to me, still convinced that I'm the villain in this story. Michael and Jessica have tried to reconcile, suddenly very interested in having a relationship with their wealthy sister, but I've learned to recognize manipulation in all its forms. I send them Christmas cards with pictures of my latest property acquisitions, just to remind them that the failure they dismissed is now more successful than they ever dreamed of being. The neighborhood has transformed under my ownership. I've renovated every property, increased the values, created a community where people actually want to live instead of just survive. My tenants respect me, my business partners value my opinion, and my bank account grows every month while I sleep. Sometimes I drive past their old house, now mine, and I think about that scared little girl who used to sit in the wooden chair, believing she was everything they said she was. She deserved so much better than what they gave her. She deserved to know that their limitations were not her limitations, that their fears were not her reality, that their small minds could never contain her big dreams. It took me 28 years to learn that lesson, but now that I have, I'm unstoppable. And the best part? They finally know it too.